Welcome back, my friends. I have another old and disturbing story to tell you. A rise to power led to a horrid massacre of New Mexico's first United States governor. Charles Bent was born in 1799 in Charleston, Virginia. He moved with his family to St. Louis, Missouri, and in 1822 he began working for the Missouri Fur Company. After too much competition in the fur trade in Missouri, Bent and his brother moved to New Mexico, and that was in 1829. They made quite a bit of money on the Santa Fe Trail. In 1830, Charles Bent partnered with Seren St. Vrain, a trapper and trader from St. Louis who lived in Taos. They became one of the leading mercantile establishments of the West. They made a little deal with the American Fur Company and together took over the fur trade. In 1835, Bent moved to Taos and married Maria Ignacia Jaramillo, and they had 5 children. In 1843, Bent's sister-in-law, Josefina Jaramillo, married the famous Kit Carson. Bent was also very wealthy and acted superior to the natives and Mexicans. He often wrote letters of his dislike for the people of New Mexico, writing they have no opinion of their own, they're stupid, obstinate, ignorant, deceitful, and vain. In 1841, Bent found himself in a lawsuit with Juan Vigil. Bent and a friend, William Workman, went inside Vigil's home and accused him of lying. Workman whipped Vigil as Bent watched in approval. About a week later, 4 masked men threatened Vigil, causing him to flee. The same year, Bent was arrested and taken to Santa Fe for an alleged participation in the Texas Santa Fe expedition. His lawyer, Manuel Alvarez, appealed to the governor Armijo, and he was released with a slap on the wrist. Also in 1841, Governor Armijo approved a large grant on the east side of the mountains, which Bent received a 4th interest in. Father Antonio Jose Martinez, who was a local spokesman for the rights for the local people, knew the intentions of the Americans to acquire large parcels of land in northern New Mexico. He protested against the land of such a large parcel going to 2 foreigners. The Taos Pueblo leaders and Martinez said the grant illegally included traditional grazing and hunting lands of the Pueblo. Martinez also said the lands should be available to poor farmers for grazing. The grant is now known as the Maxwell Land Grant, which was invalidated by Governor Armijo. During the Mexican-U.S. War in 1846, General Stephen W. Kearny entered New Mexico. Instead of fighting, Governor Armijo fled to Mexico. An easy victory for Kearny. He then left for California, but not before appointing Governor Bent as the new United States Governor of New Mexico. But Kearny left little guard for Bent. Some of the townspeople seemed okay with the change and pledged allegiance to the United States, but not everyone was compliant. In fact, at that very moment, some were already plotting to take the land back from the U.S. In Santa Fe, Tomas Ortiz and Diego Archuleta, along with some other unnamed ringleaders, brought on a rebellion. They decided in December they would riot and take back their land. But their plan was found out, and to avoid the rope, they fled to Mexico. Governor Bent urged the people of New Mexico to support his government, claiming he was their best friend. He convinced himself that that was the end of the rebellion, and he returned to his Taos home for a visit. He refused a military escort against colleagues' advice. He was warned of possible danger, and some even told him just to leave New Mexico. But he didn't listen. He thought if something were to happen, he had plenty of horses in his corral for a quick escape. On the night of January 18th, 1847, the rebellion met outside of Taos to discuss the plan. They spent all night hyping each other up. Some were against such horrid acts of violence, but by the morning, most of them were pretty rowdy. They poured into Taos like a sea of angry men to repossess their land. They surrounded the Americans' homes, killing Pablo Jaramillo, Stephen Lee, Cornelio Vigil, J.W. Lill, and Narcisco Bobian. Rebels broke through the gate of Bent's home. Governor Bent opened the door. The men quickly surrounded him where he stood. He asked in Spanish, "What do you want, my friends?" "We want your head, gringo," they yelled back. Governor Bent tried calming the angry men. He begged them not to kill anyone. He said he would go with them as their prisoner to hear them out. His wife and children were in the next room, along with his sister-in-law, Mrs. Carson, and Mrs. Boggs, the neighbor. Carson and Boggs quickly dug a hole through the adobe wall with a spoon and an old poker. They pushed the children out and then crawled out too. Mrs. Bent called for her husband to follow, but he was already wounded and scalped, pulling arrows from his body as he crawled through the hole. But it was too late. A lot of the men had already made their way to Governor Bent and shot him to death. They thought about taking the women and children captive, but decided against it. The rebellion started towards Santa Fe. That night, some of the townspeople who were against the violent acts went over to the Bents. They helped them bury Governor Bent and took food and clothing to the women and children. They even let Mrs. Bent and her children stay with them in their homes. On January 21st, Colonial Prince and about 400 men met the rebels in Embudo, New Mexico. A small battle broke out, causing the rebels to retreat. The rebellion now had men in Mora. When the U.S. Army went to Mora, they were ambushed, and the U.S. captain, Israel Handley, was killed. This was the first Battle of Mora. The second Battle of Mora was February 1st, 1847. U.S. troops, led by Captain Jesse Morin, attacked the Mora rebels, leveling the village and ending the Mora revolt. On February 3rd, Price marched into Taos to Taos Pueblo. The rebels had already barricaded themselves inside the church. Soldiers shot a cannon at the church, taking down one of its thick adobe walls. The final Battle of Taos Revolt began. The U.S. troops killed about 150 rebels and captured about 400 more. Gave them a quick trial, and then they were hanged in Taos. The rebellion dragged on for another 6 months before finally ending in July 1847. The Bent home is still standing today, and it still includes the hole in the wall. It's one of the many places in Taos that make your baby hairs stand up. If you've ever walked through the plaza at night, when everything is closed and quiet, you know the feeling. Thank you for watching, honeys.